Imagine for a moment that you're holding an old, well-worn book, its pages softened by time, its margins carrying the fingerprints of those who came before you. Perhaps you've seen it on a shelf for years, or perhaps you've only ever heard its words echoed in passing. Today, you open it not as an observer, not as a collector of quotes, but as someone seeking a lens, a way of seeing, that transforms the very texture of your life. As Emmet once taught, a sacred text is not a relic. It is a living instrument, capable of awakening in you a vision that changes everything. So, before we journey inward, I invite you to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with your soul. You may have thought of Scripture as a collection of rules, stories, or poetic expressions, but when you begin to see it as a mirror held up to your inner world, the words start to move differently. They are no longer locked in ancient times, they start walking beside you in the present. A verse about patience begins speaking to your impatience at work. A parable about a seed starts whispering to you when you're wondering if your efforts will ever bear fruit. It is not that the book has changed, it is that you have started looking with new eyes. This awakening is subtle at first. You start noticing how certain phrases stay with you through the day, almost like a melody that returns when you least expect it. The teaching may not give you step-by-step instructions, but it shifts something in the way you interpret what happens to you. Instead of seeing only obstacles, you start seeing invitations. Instead of defining moments as failures, you begin to recognize them as turning points. What makes this possible is not blind acceptance, but conscious engagement. You read with the intent to find what speaks directly to your life. A simple statement, perhaps, about light overcoming darkness becomes more than metaphor when you're in the middle of a difficult season. It becomes a reminder that no situation is without a path forward, and no setback is permanent. As you let Scripture take on this living role, you begin to realize that the meaning isn't static. It grows with you. What once felt abstract now feels immediate. You return to the same passage months later and see something you couldn't see before. This is the mark of a true spiritual lens. It reveals what you're ready to perceive in the moment, but it also holds deeper layers waiting for you when your understanding expands. The more you approach Scripture this way, the more you notice its patterns weaving into your own. A verse about peace begins to shape the way you speak to a difficult family member. A teaching on forgiveness softens your grip on a grudge you thought you'd never release. You're not memorizing lines for the sake of memory. You're allowing them to rewrite the way you interpret and respond to life. And here's the quiet power in this awakening. It doesn't require you to force positivity or ignore reality. It equips you to see reality through a different filter, one that reveals possibility where before you saw only dead ends. This shift in perception is not about denying the hardship. It's about refusing to let hardship dictate your truth. Over time, the act of opening Scripture becomes less about study and more about alignment. You're aligning your inner vision with principles that endure beyond circumstance. You start walking through your day with a steady sense that there's a larger pattern at work and that your role is to keep your mind clear enough to see it. In this first step, you are not trying to master the entire text. You're simply opening the door to see differently, to let each passage be an invitation to shift the lens through which you interpret your own life. You're saying yes to a deeper partnership between the words on the page and the life you are living right now. And that yes is the seed from which everything else will grow. The moment you start looking at Scripture through this awakened lens, something begins to change in the way you listen. You realize that the page is not simply offering information, it is speaking. Not in the booming voice of drama, but in the quiet, resonant way truth always speaks, directly to the part of you that is ready to hear it. The deeper message is rarely on the surface. On the surface, you might read about a journey, a conflict, or a blessing bestowed. But underneath, there is a principle, a law, a living current of wisdom that can reshape how you think and act right now. To hear the deeper message, you must give it room. That means reading slowly, allowing the mind to rest on a single phrase until it begins to expand in meaning. It might be a sentence about courage in the face of fear, or the assurance that provision comes in due season. These are not just poetic lines. They are condensed spiritual laws. When you take the time to linger, to truly hear, you start to notice that the words are layered. The top layer is the story. Beneath that lies the universal principle. And beneath that is the specific application to your own life, unique to you in this exact moment. Hearing in this way requires you to quiet the reflex, to analyze everything instantly. Too much intellectual dissection too soon can strip the words of their life. Instead, allow them to work on you as they are, before you try to break them apart. The wisdom of a timeless teaching is that it can hold its shape across centuries while speaking personally into today's problems. A verse about a mustard seed, for instance, is not just agricultural imagery. It's a reminder that the smallest conscious shift in your thinking can grow into a vast change in your reality. As you practice listening beyond words, you may find that certain verses resonate differently depending on your current state of mind. On a calm day, you might read a passage and feel affirmed. On a day of turmoil, the same passage might feel like an urgent instruction. This is the nature of living truth. It meets you where you are, but it also calls you higher. The key is to meet it with openness, allowing it to challenge and refine your perspective without resistance. It's tempting to only seek the comforting parts, but the deeper message often lies in the passages that unsettle you. Discomfort signals that a long-held belief or pattern is being questioned. When you lean into that moment instead of turning away, you make space for transformation. You might see that a limitation you accepted as unchangeable was only a matter of perspective, and that a shift in your inner stance can alter the outcome entirely. Listening in this deeper way also strengthens your ability to discern truth in all areas of life. When you train yourself to hear beyond surface appearances in Scripture, you naturally start doing the same in conversations, events, and challenges. A criticism from someone no longer feels like a personal attack. You hear the fear or misunderstanding beneath it. A sudden setback stops being the end of the story. You hear the invitation to develop a new skill or inner quality. Every time you engage with Scripture in this way, you are refining your inner hearing. You are learning to pick up on the frequency of truth, whether it comes wrapped in poetic language, simple instruction, or challenging imagery. And the more fluent you become in this inner language, the more life begins to look like a dialogue between your soul and the principles that govern all creation. This is where the transformation quietly accelerates. The words are no longer static. They are alive in you. They begin to shape the way you think before you even realize it. And as thought shifts, so does perception. And as perception shifts, so does the life you are living. This is the path of hearing the deeper message. It begins in stillness, it grows in understanding, and it blossoms into an entirely new way of seeing. When you begin to hear the deeper message in Scripture, the next realization dawns. Naturally, you are not reading an ancient record meant for someone else's life. You are standing face to face with a personal light meant for yours. The distance between then and now dissolves. Stories you once thought belonged to a faraway culture or a bygone age suddenly speak into your Monday morning, your late-night worries, and your quiet hopes. The Scripture stops being an artifact and becomes an ally. This shift happens the moment you see that behind every metaphor, every parable, and every verse lies a truth that does not expire. When a passage says, "The meek shall inherit the earth," it isn't bound to a historical transaction. It is a living statement about the enduring strength of humility. When it speaks of sowing and reaping, it's not only about crops in the soil. It's about the inevitable return of whatever seeds you plant in thought, speech, and action. And so, you start to approach Scripture differently. Instead of asking, "What did this mean back then?" you ask, "What does this mean for me right now?" This is not to disregard its original setting, but to let it fully fulfill its purpose as a channel for universal principles to reach you in the exact circumstances you are facing. A verse about walking through the valley of shadow becomes your companion when you're navigating uncertainty in your career. A line about setting your face like flint strengthens you when you're called to hold your ground in the face of opposition. This is how Scripture becomes personal light. It meets you where you are and illuminates the path one step at a time. It rarely reveals the entire map. More often, it gives you the clarity you need for the moment at hand. And as you act on that clarity, the next step comes into view. This dynamic is not about waiting for magical signs, it's about staying so attuned to the spirit of the teaching that you can recognize your next right move when it appears. The personalization of Scripture is not a random projection of your feelings. It's the natural result of a living dialogue between principle and perception. When your mind is prepared open, alert, receptive, the truth finds its way into your specific life situation with uncanny precision. You begin to feel as though the text knows you, as though it was written with your trials and victories in mind. And perhaps in a way, it was, for truth is never bound by time or person. The more you let the words shine on your present reality, the more they reshape how you respond to it. Suddenly, challenges lose some of their weight because you see them through a filter of meaning. A verse reminding you that perfect love casts out fear is no longer a poetic comfort. It's a call to replace anxiety with deliberate acts of love in the exact place you feel afraid. A passage about blessing those who oppose you stops being a lofty moral ideal and becomes a practical tool for keeping your peace intact. With every such application, Scripture weaves itself into the fabric of your daily awareness. You no longer compartmentalize it as a Sunday subject or a morning ritual. It flows into the conversations you have, the decisions you make, and the way you carry yourself. You notice how its principles steady you in a crisis, guide you in uncertainty, and keep you humble in success. And in this integration, something profound happens. You begin to trust the process. You realize that the light you are receiving is not a flicker that might fade, but a steady beam that adjusts to whatever terrain you face. You no longer treat the words as distant ideals. You live in them, and they live in you. This is the bridge from ancient text to personal light. A bridge you walk every time you let Scripture not only inform you, but transform the way you see, interpret, and respond to your life. And once you've crossed, you can never go back to seeing the words as merely historical again. Once you see Scripture as a personal light, you start noticing a pattern. It consistently points you toward the role of your own mind in shaping what you experience. This isn't about willpower in a shallow sense, nor is it about forcing yourself to think happy thoughts. It's about recognizing that every verse, every story, every command to be transformed is an invitation to work from the inside out. Scripture, when understood in its deeper current, is constantly drawing your attention to the cause and effect relationship between thought and reality. You might read, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." And suddenly, you see it less as a quaint proverb and more as a precise statement of spiritual law. It's telling you that the content of your inner life is not hidden. It will inevitably show itself in the form your outer life takes. Another passage urges you to renew your mind, and you realize this isn't a gentle suggestion. It's a vital directive if you wish to change your experience. This understanding shifts the way you approach every teaching. Instead of seeing Scripture as a list of external do's and don'ts, you begin to read it as a guide to aligning your inner state with truth. When it tells you to forgive, it's not merely to satisfy a moral code, it's to free your mind from the corrosive grip of resentment, which distorts your perception and blocks new possibilities. When it calls you to give thanks, it's not for the sake of politeness, It's because gratitude changes the lens through which you see, allowing you to recognize opportunities you would otherwise miss. As this pattern becomes clear, you start to take greater responsibility for the quality of your thinking. You can no longer pretend that your inner life has no bearing on your circumstances. You begin to notice how certain verses are not only comforting but corrective. They gently expose the ways your habitual thoughts have been working against you. And rather than resisting that correction, you lean into it, knowing that every adjustment inside creates a ripple effect outside. This is where Scripture stops being a passive reading experience and becomes an active dialogue. You read a line about faith moving mountains, and you ask yourself not in guilt, but in curiosity, what mountains in your life remain unmoved because your thoughts are still fixed on the obstacle instead of the possibility? You see that faith isn't about denying the existence of the mountain, it's about refusing to grant it the final word in your reality. The recognition of the mind's role also deepens your engagement with symbolic passages. A storm on the sea can be seen as the turbulence in your own thinking. The command, "Peace, be still," becomes a personal instruction to quiet the chaos within before expecting peace without. You begin to read not just for comfort, but for alignment, aligning your inner state with the principles that produce the results you desire. Over time, you realize that Scripture is training you to become conscious of what you entertain in thought. It's not asking you to suppress feelings or ignore difficulties. It's teaching you to take ownership of the mental and emotional seeds you plant. You start catching yourself when old fears or grudges try to dominate, replacing them with images and truths that support the life you are building. And in this process, a new kind of authority grows in you. You are no longer at the mercy of every passing thought, nor dependent on external conditions to set your state of mind. You recognize that the same principles you read in Scripture are the ones you are now applying in real time, deliberately, consistently, and with growing confidence. This is the uncovering of the mind's role, a steady awakening to the truth that what you dwell on becomes the atmosphere of your life. And Scripture, in its quiet, persistent way, keeps pointing you back to that reality until it becomes the foundation from which you live. As you recognize the mind's role in shaping experience, Scripture begins to unfold its language of symbols not as abstract poetry, but as precise illustrations of how life works. The imagery is rich and deliberate: seeds, light, water, bread. A path through the wilderness. These are not just artifacts of an ancient world. They are living metaphors designed to carry timeless principles into your understanding. And when you interpret them as life lessons, they become instructions for your thoughts, your choices, and your daily responses. Take, for instance, the image of a seed. In the agricultural sense, it speaks of planting and harvesting, but in spiritual terms, it is a perfect portrait of mental causation. Every thought you hold, every belief you nurture, is a seed sown into the soil of your mind. Some seeds produce a harvest of peace, joy, and opportunity. Others yield anxiety, division, and delay. Scripture doesn't simply admire the seed, it tells you to choose carefully what you plant, to tend it, and to expect the harvest that matches its nature. Or consider the recurring image of light. Light dispels darkness, not by fighting it, but by being what it is, illumination. In the same way, an insight from Scripture doesn't need to wrestle with error or fear. It simply replaces them by revealing truth. The moment you let understanding in, confusion loses its hold. You begin to see how this applies when you're facing uncertainty in life. Instead of trying to conquer every doubt, you can focus on bringing in more light through clarity of thought, constructive vision, and inspired action. Water, another frequent symbol, speaks of renewal, cleansing, and life. It's not accidental that water often appears at moments of transition, whether in the crossing of a river or the imagery of a soul refreshed. In your own journey, these moments of washing might look like releasing a grudge, forgiving yourself, or letting go of a mental pattern that has kept you stagnant. The teaching is clear. Renewal is not a one-time event. It's a practice that keeps you open to growth. Even wilderness has its lesson. In Scripture, the wilderness is not just empty space. It's a place of preparation, where distractions are stripped away and clarity emerges. You can see this in your own life when periods of seeming isolation or delay become the very ground where resilience and focus are built. What looks barren is often the training field for what's ahead. When you approach these symbols as life lessons, you no longer read Scripture as a distant chronicle. You read it as a coded guidebook that uses tangible images to convey intangible laws. You learn to ask, what is the seed in this story? What is the light? What is the water? Where is the wilderness? And how are these showing up in my life right now? This symbolic reading also keeps you from getting stuck in literalism that misses the deeper power of the teaching. It allows the meaning to travel freely from the ancient context into your modern reality without losing its truth. The same symbol can speak to someone's financial struggle, another's health challenge, and another's search for purpose, all because the principle behind it is universal. As you become fluent in this language of symbols, Scripture turns into a living conversation. A simple verse can carry you through an entire day because you're unpacking its imagery in the choices you make and the attitudes you hold. The parable of a lamp under a basket becomes a call to stop hiding your abilities. The story of a shepherd leaving 99 sheep to find one becomes a reminder to value what you've been overlooking. By interpreting symbols as life lessons, you give Scripture permission to speak to you at every stage of your journey. And each time you apply a symbol to a real-life moment, you strengthen the bridge between principle and practice. Over time, these symbols stop being just words you read. They become ways you see. Once you've learned to read Scripture's symbols as living lessons, the next movement is to take what you've seen and let it shift your perspective in real time. Insight without application remains an idea. But when you take even a single verse and apply it to a present situation, you feel the lens of your mind tilt, and suddenly the entire scene changes. This is the moment where Scripture moves from inspiration to transformation. Perhaps you've been wrestling with a conflict at work, a conversation that keeps looping in your head. You recall the imagery of turning the other cheek, not as passive endurance, but as a deliberate choice to respond without feeding hostility. In that instant, the cheek becomes your shift in focus. You refuse to center your attention on retaliation, and instead, you create space for a calmer, wiser response. The conflict loses its grip on you, not because the other person has changed, but because you are no longer viewing it through the lens of offense. Or maybe you are facing a financial setback, and the fear is loud. A verse about the lilies of the field comes to mind not as a suggestion to be careless, but as a reminder that worry adds nothing to the solution. The imagery of lilies thriving without strain helps you shift from panic to presence, making room for ideas and opportunities you couldn't see while tense. The external problem may not vanish instantly, but the inner grip loosens, and that is where change begins. The shift in perspective is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as subtle as reinterpreting a delay from punishment to preparation. Scripture's stories of journeys and seasons, 40 days in the desert, years in a wilderness, become templates for patience. You see that your current waiting may be equipping you with the exact qualities you'll need for what's coming next. What's vital here is that you don't leave the verse on the page. You carry it into the moment. You let it run alongside your thoughts and ask, how would this truth see what I'm seeing? In doing so, you break the habit of reacting from old patterns. Instead, you begin to respond from a place shaped by principle, not impulse. The more you practice this, the faster the shift happens. At first, you might only remember the verse hours after the moment has passed, but over time, it surfaces right when you need it. It's like training a reflex, the reflex to see differently before you speak, before you decide, before you act. And each time you catch yourself in that split second and choose the higher perspective, you strengthen your ability to live from it. It's important to note that this process doesn't mean ignoring facts or pretending everything is fine. It means allowing truth to interpret the facts for you, so you aren't trapped by the first appearance of things. This is why a single verse, well applied, can redirect the entire trajectory of a situation, not because the external conditions bend instantly, but because your way of engaging with them changes, and that changes everything else. Scripture becomes not just a book you read, but a lens you carry. You begin to trust that within its lines lies a way of seeing that will never leave you cornered or powerless. And each time you let that way of seeing enter a real-world moment, the relationship deepens you, and the truth are walking together, interpreting life as it unfolds, and choosing the perspective that leads to peace, clarity, and strength. This is the quiet turning point in your journey. The day you stop treating Scripture as an occasional comfort and start treating it as your active companion, the voice in your ear reminding you that there is always another way to see. As you continue applying Scripture in real time, you start to notice that its central call is to a renewal of thought, not a one-time insight, but a steady, deliberate transformation of the way your mind works. The change it invites is not surface level. It reaches down to the patterns that have been running, often unnoticed, for years. Scripture is relentless in its reminder that to see life differently, you must think differently, and to think differently, you must renew your mind over and over again. This renewal is not about erasing your personality or pretending past experiences never happened. It is about replacing outdated conclusions with truth that is more aligned with the life you want to live. Where you once assumed that a setback meant failure, renewal teaches you to see it as preparation. Where you once believed resources were scarce, renewal shifts you into the awareness that opportunities often expand with your willingness to act. The process is both gentle and persistent. You might encounter a verse you've read dozens of times, but one day it stands out in a new way, highlighting a thought pattern you didn't even realize you were holding. Maybe it's the call to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and suddenly you realize that your inner dialogue about your own worth has been quietly sabotaging you. Renewal begins in that recognition, but it takes root when you actively replace the old message with a new one, grounded in truth. Scripture often uses metaphors for this process, putting off the old self, putting on the new, washing away, making clean. Each one points to the same reality. You can't simply add new ideas on top of old beliefs and expect transformation. You must clear space. You must identify the mental habits that keep leading you back to the same results and consciously choose different thoughts until they become your new default. This isn't always comfortable. In fact, the discomfort is a sign that the renewal is real. It means you are interrupting a well-worn path in your mind and building a new one. At first, the old path will try to pull you back. It's familiar, it's easy, it's automatic. But with repetition, the new path becomes stronger, and soon it feels more natural than the old. One of the greatest helps in this process is to anchor your renewal in specific truths from Scripture that directly counter the patterns you are replacing. If you've been living with a constant sense of not being enough, you can hold to a verse that affirms your value and purpose until it becomes a living conviction. If fear has been your default, you can return again and again to a line that speaks of courage, light, and steadfastness. The key is consistency, not reading once and hoping for change, but revisiting until the new thought becomes automatic. Over time, you'll notice that renewal changes how you interpret events before you even realize you're doing it. What used to send you into panic now sparks curiosity. What used to feel like rejection now looks like redirection. The Scripture you've been living with has rewired the way you think, not in a way that blinds you to reality, but in a way that allows you to see more of it. And this is the gift of a renewed mind. It doesn't just help you get through challenges. It equips you to navigate life with a vision that is consistently aligned with truth. You begin to trust your inner responses more, because you know they are being shaped by principles that have stood the test of time. The work of renewing your mind is never finished in the sense of completion. It is an ongoing practice, a rhythm, a choice you make daily. But as you stay with it, you discover that each renewal brings not only a clearer mind, but also a clearer view of the life you are here to live. With your mind in a state of ongoing renewal, Scripture's influence shifts from moments of insight to a steady presence. Now it's about holding the vision it gives you, keeping the inspired picture alive in your awareness, long enough for it to shape both your inner state and your outward reality. A vision born from Scripture is not just a hopeful daydream. It's a mental blueprint, infused with principles that carry the power to manifest in lived experience if you will sustain it. This is where many falter, not because the vision isn't clear, but because it is abandoned too soon. Life's noise creeps in, distractions multiply, and the inspired image fades into the background. Scripture anticipates this struggle. Again and again, it instructs you to write the vision and make it plain, to keep the words before your eyes, to meditate day and night. The reason is simple. What you repeatedly hold in mind is what gains strength and substance in your life. Holding the vision means returning to it deliberately. You might carry a key verse in your thoughts throughout the day, letting it color how you see each situation. You might revisit a parable that stirs your hope, imagining yourself already living in the outcome it describes. You're not forcing reality to comply. You're aligning your inner stance with the truth that reality can change. There will be moments when holding the vision feels effortless, when inspiration flows freely and the picture seems vivid. But there will also be moments when it feels like nothing is happening, when the old patterns try to reassert themselves, or when circumstances look like the exact opposite of what you're believing for. These are the moments Scripture has prepared you for. They are the test of whether you will let appearances dictate your focus or whether you will keep your eyes on the truth that inspired you in the first place. The discipline of holding the vision is not passive. It's active engagement. When doubt shows up, you answer it with the image and the words you've chosen to keep alive. When impatience rises, you remind yourself that every vision has its appointed time and will not be rushed or delayed beyond what is perfect. You also begin to notice how this practice affects your choices. The clearer the vision, the more your actions begin to line up with it. You make decisions that support its fulfillment, often without consciously strategizing. You take steps that once felt intimidating because the vision has already made the outcome feel possible. Holding the vision also reshapes your emotional life. You become less reactive to temporary setbacks because they no longer have the power to define the whole picture. Even in uncertainty, you carry a quiet assurance, a knowing that the inspired image you're sustaining is more real to you than the circumstances trying to contradict it. Over time, this steady holding becomes second nature. You're not constantly straining to remember. The vision is simply part of how you see the world. Scripture's words have embedded themselves so deeply that they rise unbidden in conversation, in decision-making, in moments of stillness. The vision is no longer something you reach for, it is something you live from. This is the strength of holding the vision Scripture gives you. It allows truth to outlast doubt, hope to outlast delay, and clarity to outlast confusion. By sustaining the inspired picture, you give it the space to unfold into reality, not through force, but through faithful alignment of thought, word, and action. As you hold the vision Scripture gives you, a natural extension emerges, speaking truth into your circumstances. The vision strengthens in your mind, but when you give it voice, you reinforce it in a way that reaches deeper into your own conviction and begins to influence the environment around you. Scripture's consistent thread is that words carry creative power. They are not empty sounds, they are seeds, carriers of intention, shaping what takes root in your thoughts and what unfolds in your life. When you read that death and life are in the power of the tongue, it's not a poetic exaggeration. It's a statement of how spoken words align with mental images to produce results. A thought held silently has power, but a thought spoken with clarity and belief reinforces itself. It declares your agreement with the truth you've chosen to see, even when circumstances haven't yet shifted to reflect it. Speaking truth into circumstance doesn't mean shouting affirmations or denying reality. It means choosing language that aligns with the principles you believe in, especially when those principles are being challenged. If your vision is for peace in a strained relationship, your words to and about that person must reflect that peace. If your vision is for provision in a time of lack, your language must carry gratitude and expectation, not complaint and defeat. There's a subtle but vital shift that happens when you adopt this practice. You become more intentional with your speech. You notice how often casual talk undermines the very vision you are holding. A quick phrase like, "This will never work," or "I'm just unlucky," can erode what you've been building internally. Scripture's wisdom urges you to guard your mouth because it knows how easily an unguarded word can plant seeds you don't actually want to harvest. This isn't about policing every sentence out of fear. It's about aligning your language with your chosen truth so consistently that it becomes your natural mode of speaking. You start to find that even in private, when no one else can hear, your words match the vision you are sustaining. And because your speech is an outflow of your thought, every word spoken is another stroke, reinforcing the mental image you've been cultivating. Speaking truth also has a stabilizing effect when circumstances try to provoke you. A sudden setback might tempt you to speak defeat, but the discipline you've built keeps your response anchored. Instead of saying, "This always happens to me," you might say, "This is temporary, and I know the way forward will become clear." That choice of words doesn't just sound positive, it shapes your focus, directing your energy towards solutions rather than spiraling into discouragement. There will be moments when speaking truth feels like the hardest thing to do, when the evidence in front of you seems to mock your words. But it is in these moments that the practice carries the most weight. Scripture shows again and again that speaking from faith, not sight, is a key turning point in transformation. The words you speak in the tension between vision and reality are the ones that anchor you until the two match. Over time, your speech becomes part of your identity. People notice the steadiness in your tone, the absence of defeat in your language, and more importantly, you notice how your own confidence grows. The act of speaking truth is not merely for others to hear. It is a continual reminder to yourself of the reality you choose to live from. This is the essence of speaking the inner word, letting the truths drawn from Scripture live not only in your mind, but in your voice, so they can shape your environment, your actions, and your expectations. When thought, vision, and speech align, the power of transformation becomes an unbroken current flowing through every part of your life. Once truth is spoken into your circumstances, the next step is to walk in the new awareness it has created. This is where the vision and the words move from being internal convictions to becoming the way you live moment by moment. Walking in new awareness means letting your actions, decisions, and even your posture reflect the reality you've already embraced in your mind. Scripture's call to walk by faith, not by sight, isn't about ignoring what's in front of you. It's about letting the unseen truth shape how you move through what's in front of you. When you begin to walk in this way, the shift is noticeable. You make choices as if the vision is already unfolding, even before there's visible confirmation. If your Scripture-inspired vision is to live with a greater sense of peace, you carry yourself in a manner that reflects that peace now in your tone with others, in your patience during delays, in the way you approach your daily routines. You're not waiting for external permission to act differently. You're living as though the reality has already begun, because in truth, it has. This way of living changes the atmosphere around you. Others may not know exactly what's different, but they feel it. They sense the steadiness in your presence, the absence of frantic urgency, the quiet certainty that you know where you're going. And it's not an act, it's the natural byproduct of aligning your steps with the truth you've internalized. Walking in new awareness also means making decisions that support the life you've envisioned, even when they require courage. Scripture may inspire you to step into opportunities you once would have dismissed. It might urge you to release commitments or habits that no longer align with who you are becoming. Each of these choices reinforces the awareness that you are no longer living from your old limitations. This isn't about perfection, it's about consistency. There will be moments when you catch yourself slipping into old reactions, but now you notice them more quickly. Instead of spiraling into self-criticism, you use them as reminders to return to the vision. You adjust, you realign, and you keep walking. The power lies in refusing to let a single misstep convince you that the journey has stalled. One of the most profound aspects of walking in new awareness is how it changes your relationship with challenges. Situations that would have once triggered fear or doubt become opportunities to demonstrate the truth you've been holding. A difficult conversation becomes a place to practice patience and clarity. A financial delay becomes a chance to show yourself that provision is not your only source of stability. Each challenge becomes proof to yourself that the truth you've embraced is strong enough to carry you through. And as you live this way, something remarkable happens. You start to feel at home in the new awareness. It stops feeling like something you're reaching for and starts feeling like who you are. You realize that Scripture's purpose is not just to give you moments of inspiration, but to change the very way you inhabit your life. In time, walking in new awareness becomes less about effort and more about identity. You no longer ask, "What should I do to live from this truth?" You simply live, and the actions flow naturally from the renewed mind and steady vision you've cultivated. This is where the transformation becomes unmistakable, not because you've told everyone you've changed, but because your life has quietly begun to look like the truth you've been walking in all along. When you are walking in new awareness, challenges will still come, but you now meet them with an inspired vision instead of fear or resignation. This is one of Scripture's greatest gifts. It equips you to face trials with clarity, not confusion. The very passages that once encouraged you in quiet moments now rise up as active tools in moments of pressure. They become anchors that keep you steady when circumstances try to shake you. A crisis used to feel like an interruption to your growth. Now you recognize it as part of the journey. You recall the image of a house built on rock. It withstands storms, not because storms never come, but because its foundation is unshakable. When you've built your foundation on truths drawn from Scripture, the wind may blow, the rain may fall, but you remain upright because your stability isn't dependent on the weather. Meeting trials with inspired vision begins with refusing to be defined by the first appearance of things. A sudden loss or setback may stir emotion, but you pause long enough to remember the greater context. Perhaps it's the teaching that all things work together for good that comes to mind not as a trite comfort, but as a framework for looking beyond the immediate pain. You ask yourself, if this is ultimately for my good, what might it be preparing me for? That single question can shift your emotional center from despair to curiosity. In practice, this looks like holding your vision even when the facts seem to contradict it. If you've been building toward a goal and a door closes, you don't collapse into defeat. You remember the many examples in Scripture where a closed path was simply a redirection to something better. You acknowledge the disappointment, but you also acknowledge the truth that your journey is not over. This perspective doesn't make trials painless, but it makes them purposeful. You begin to see every challenge as an opportunity to test and strengthen the truths you've been holding. A principle is only theory until it is applied under pressure. When you respond from your inspired vision instead of from old fear, you prove to yourself that the change is real. Sometimes, The inspired vision in trial is as simple as remembering who you are in the middle of difficulty. A verse about courage might remind you that fear is not your natural state. A story of deliverance might remind you that help can come in ways you can't predict. The trial becomes a stage on which these truths can act, and you become a participant in bringing them to life. Over time, you start to welcome challenges as catalysts. You don't seek them, but you no longer dread them. Each one becomes an opportunity to refine your focus, to strip away what no longer serves you, and to deepen your trust in the vision you've been given. This isn't naive optimism. It's the quiet strength of someone who has seen too many turnarounds to believe that any current trouble is the final word. Meeting trials with inspired vision also affects those around you. When people see you steady in the face of difficulty, not denying the problem, but refusing to be owned by it, they begin to wonder what's shaping your perspective. Your response becomes a testimony in itself, showing that the principles you've been living are not just words, but a working power. And in the end, every trial met with inspired vision reinforces your own belief that Scripture's wisdom is not just ancient truth, it's present power. It is as alive in the valley as it is on the mountaintop, and it will carry you through both with the same unshakable steadiness. As you meet trials with inspired vision, you begin to see another layer of Scripture's guidance. It's called to let go of the old self. This is more than adjusting habits or improving behavior. It is a deep release of identities, beliefs, and narratives that no longer align with the truth you've come to know. The old self is not who you truly are. It's the collection of learned limitations, false conclusions, and protective masks you've carried out of habit or necessity. Scripture's repeated imagery of putting off the old and putting on the new is a clear invitation to lay these burdens down. Letting go of the old self begins with awareness. You start to notice when your reactions are rooted in outdated beliefs. Perhaps you've been seeing yourself as someone who always struggles or never gets the break, and you recognize that this view is incompatible with the vision you've been holding. Or maybe you've carried a quiet fear that you are unworthy of good things, and you now see how that belief has been steering your choices. Awareness is the first untying of the knot. The release itself is a process. It doesn't happen by condemning the old self, it happens by replacing it. You take the truths you've drawn from Scripture and consciously use them to reshape the inner image you hold of yourself. If the old self lived in scarcity, the new self acts from abundance. If the old self braced for rejection, the new self moves with the assurance of belonging. Each time you choose the new over the old, you loosen the grip of the patterns that once dictated your life. This is where the renewal of mind becomes deeply personal. You're no longer just changing thoughts, you're changing the very person who is doing the thinking. Scripture becomes a mirror, not just showing you who you've been, but reflecting who you are becoming. You might see this in verses that speak of being a new creation, or of the old passing away and the new coming forth. These aren't distant ideals, they're descriptions of what is already happening in you. Letting go of the old self is not always comfortable. There will be moments when the familiar calls you back, when the temptation to slip into old patterns feels strong. This is when you remind yourself that familiarity is not the same as truth. Just because a thought or behavior feels natural doesn't mean it serves you now. The comfort of the old self is the comfort of a small cage. It feels safe only because it's predictable. With each release, you make room for more of the life your vision is pointing toward. You find that certain relationships shift because you no longer play the role you once did. Some opportunities fall away and others appear because your choices are being made from a new center. You may even notice your physical demeanor changing, how you walk into a room, how you speak, how you carry yourself. These are the outer signs of an inner transformation. Over time, the old self becomes harder to recall, not because you deny your past, but because you no longer identify with it. You can look back at who you were with compassion, knowing that every step, even the misguided ones, brought you to the point where you could see and choose differently. And now, you live in alignment with the truth that you are more than the sum of your old habits and stories. This letting go is not an ending, it's a clearing. It's the removal of what no longer serves, making space for the new self to take its full place. And, as Scripture affirms, the new self is not something you create from scratch. It is who you've been all along, waiting to be uncovered. When you have released the old self, the natural next step is to live as the fulfilled Word. This is the point where Scripture's promises, principles, and visions are no longer something you aspire to. They are the reality you inhabit. You stop treating truth as a distant goal and begin embodying it as your present identity. The gap between what is written and how I live starts to close. Living the fulfilled Word means your thoughts, speech, and actions align without constant inner negotiation. You no longer have to remind yourself to choose peace. You act from peace because it has become part of you. You don't struggle to trust, you move in trust because you've seen the faithfulness of the principles you've lived by. The Word has moved from your mind into your nature. This shift is subtle but profound. In earlier stages, you might have worked hard to remember the vision or recall the verse that would guide your response. Now you notice that the guidance surfaces instantly, almost unconsciously, because it's the lens through which you view the world. When an obstacle appears, you meet it from a place of calm readiness. When an opportunity arrives, you respond without hesitation, because it aligns with the truth you've already embraced. Living the fulfilled Word also changes the way you carry your vision for the future. Instead of waiting for circumstances to catch up before you feel whole, you live in the wholeness now. If Scripture speaks of joy, you practice joy in the present moment. If it speaks of freedom, you act from freedom today. By doing so, you dissolve the delay between principle and experience. You don't force the outer world to match the inner, it begins to match naturally, because the inner has already shifted. This way of living also transforms your relationships. You no longer interact with others from the need to prove, defend, or control. Instead, you relate from a place of overflow. The same truths that have reshaped your life become a quiet offering to those around you, not as lectures or demands, but as the way you show up. People notice your steadiness, your generosity of spirit, your refusal to be drawn into needless conflict. They may not know the source, but they feel the difference. Living the fulfilled Word does not mean challenges disappear. It means challenges meet a different you. The difference is not in what happens, but in who is present to meet it. When delays occur, you stay grounded. When unexpected demands arise, you respond with adaptability instead of panic. Every situation becomes another place where the Word you've embodied proves its strength. Over time, this embodiment becomes the new normal. You stop measuring your progress by how often you remember to apply truth and start recognizing it by how naturally you live from it without conscious effort. This doesn't mean you never need reminders. It means the reminders are fewer because the principles have been absorbed into your way of being. And perhaps the most powerful change is this: living the fulfilled Word removes the sense of separation between you and the truth you've been learning. You no longer see yourself as someone trying to live up to a standard. You see yourself as someone whose life flows from the standard itself. The Word and your life are not parallel, they are one. This is the place Scripture has been leading you all along, not to memorize, not to merely believe, but to embody. And when you reach this point, you find that the journey is not over. It simply moves into a deeper expression. For now, the truth you live becomes the seed for what will unfold next. When you begin living the fulfilled Word, the world around you starts to look different, not because every circumstance has changed, but because your perception has. Scripture's truths have become the filter through which you interpret reality, and that filter brings clarity, compassion, and wisdom. You see the world through Scripture's eyes, and in doing so, You no longer feel like a passive observer of life. You recognize patterns, meanings, and opportunities that others might overlook entirely. This shift is not about romanticizing the world or pretending away its struggles. It's about seeing those struggles in the context of a greater order. You notice the threads of cause and effect in people's actions. You see how fear drives conflict and how love dissolves it. You watch cycles of bitterness break when forgiveness enters the picture. In short, you become aware of the invisible laws that Scripture has been teaching all along, now operating right in front of you. When you look at people, you see beyond their behavior into the beliefs and wounds that shape them. A harsh word aimed at you no longer provokes immediate retaliation. Instead, you recognize it as the outflow of someone's inner state. This doesn't mean you excuse harmful actions, but it does mean you can respond without adding fuel to the fire. In seeing through Scripture's lens, you choose responses that protect your peace and, at times, plant seeds for change in others. Even ordinary moments take on new depth. A child laughing becomes a reminder of joy, unburdened by self-consciousness. A stranger offering help becomes evidence of the interconnectedness that Scripture so often illustrates. You realize that the world is not an abstract concept, it is a living web of relationships, each interaction an opportunity to embody truth. Seeing through this lens also changes how you approach challenges on a larger scale. Where others see chaos in the news, you see opportunities for wisdom, courage, and unity to emerge. You refuse to be swept into collective fear or despair because you know those states of mind only perpetuate the very problems they fear. Instead, you anchor yourself in the same truths you've lived personally and trust that they apply universally. This perspective is not something you switch on and off, it becomes part of how you move through life. The more you see the world through Scripture's eyes, the more you notice alignment between your inner state and your outer experiences. It becomes easier to choose faith over fear, generosity over scarcity, peace over reaction because you see, with increasing clarity, how those choices shape reality. And here lies one of the most powerful outcomes of this way of seeing. It frees you from the illusion that you are powerless. When you understand that your perception shapes your experience and that Scripture offers a lens grounded in truth, you realize that you always have a choice. You can choose to see through fear, or you can choose to see through faith. You can focus on what's missing, or you can recognize what's possible. The choice is yours in every moment. In time, this way of seeing becomes effortless. You wake each day with a sense of readiness not because you know exactly what will happen, but because you trust the lens through which you'll view it. And with that trust, the world opens up in ways you never noticed before. This is what it means to see the world through Scripture's eyes. To live in the same world as everyone else, yet experience it differently. Not as a place of constant threat, but as a field where truth, compassion, and vision can be practiced and multiplied. When you see the world through Scripture's eyes, you begin to understand that the journey is not a straight line with a finish, it is an unbroken circle. The insights you've gained, the visions you've held, the truths you've spoken, and the changes you've lived all loop back into each other, deepening and expanding over time. Each pass through the circle takes you further, not in distance, but in depth. The unbroken circle means that the principles you've learned are never used up. A verse that transformed you years ago can return with new meaning when life brings you into a fresh season. A truth you once applied to a personal challenge might now guide you in helping someone else through theirs. In this way, Scripture remains alive not because the words change, but because you do. You begin to see that every stage of the path prepares you for the next, and that none of it is wasted. The trials that once seemed like detours become landmarks when you look back. The moments of doubt become proof of how far you've come, and the victories, rather than ending the story, become starting points for a deeper expression of the same truth. Living in the unbroken circle also keeps you humble. No matter how much clarity you have gained, there is always more to see. Each insight is an invitation, not a conclusion. This keeps your heart open, your mind teachable, and your spirit alert to new layers of meaning. You stop grasping for a final arrival and instead commit to staying in motion within the circle, always learning, always applying, always returning to the source. The beauty of this way of living is that it sustains itself. The more you practice seeing, speaking, and walking in truth, the more natural it becomes. And as it becomes natural, it becomes easier to share not by forcing it on others, but by living in a way that naturally reflects it. People sense the stability in you, the absence of frantic striving, the deep trust that you are exactly where you need to be in the circle. In time, you realize that the circle isn't just your journey, it's the pattern of life itself. Seasons turn, challenges come and go, growth unfolds in cycles. Scripture does not take you out of that rhythm. It teaches you how to move within it with grace, confidence, and awareness. You stop fearing the return of old themes, because you know that each time they appear, you meet them from a higher vantage point. And perhaps the most freeing truth of the unbroken circle is this: there is no point at which you are cut off from the source of vision. No matter how far you feel you've wandered, the path curves back toward truth. No matter how dark a moment feels, the light you've seen before will meet you again. In this way, the circle is not a trap, it is a promise. The journey you began with a single glimpse of Scripture's power now continues without end, deepening your vision, strengthening your spirit, and reminding you that transformation is not an event, it is a way of seeing, a way of living, and a way of being that will guide you for the rest of your days. As we bring this journey to a close, slow your thoughts and let the arc of these truths settle within you. We have walked from the first moment of awakening, seeing Scripture as a living lens, through the stages of hearing its deeper message, applying it in the moment, renewing your mind, holding the vision, speaking the truth, and embodying it until it becomes your very way of being. We've seen how trials refine rather than diminish, how releasing the old self makes room for the new, and how living the fulfilled word reshapes not only how you see the world, but how the world responds to you. Now, let yourself rest in the knowing that this work is not finished because it is not meant to be. The truths you've encountered here are not a checklist to complete. They are living companions. They will meet you again tomorrow, and the day after, and in the years ahead, each time showing you something you could not have seen before. Whatever your current season, remember that you are not starting from scratch. Every insight you've embraced has already changed you in ways that cannot be undone. Even in moments when you feel far from your vision, you are still within the unbroken circle. Every step is part of the path. So take with you the quiet confidence that you are equipped not only to face what comes, but to shape it through the vision, the truth, and the steady awareness you now carry. Live as though the light has already dawned, because in many ways it has. And as you move forward, keep your eyes open, your mind renewed, and your heart aligned. The journey continues,